So, good evening, everyone. I'm David Dawson, Director of the Wiltshire Museum in Devizes, which you can see here. Devizes is at the heart of Wiltshire, and we are halfway between the two parts of the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site. We're an independent museum with only a tiny grant and a nationally important designated collection, particularly for its archaeology. So this afternoon, is it this afternoon, this evening? I'm never quite sure at 5:30. I'm going to run through just a few selected items from our art collection, which are on Art UK. I've chosen things that I think really give an insight into Wiltshire rather than things that have immense art historical basis. Unfortunately, we've no Turners, but we do have some really interesting things that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. So the first work is this, which is a pair of bustards. You can see the male in the foreground, the female in the midground. A pair of great bustards on Salisbury Plain. Now, this was painted by an artist called Henry Grant, who we know was listed in the 1871 census as a bird preserver, taxidermist. And he gave this painting to the museum in 1870. And we have a number of great bustards in the collection. And it's likely that he actually prepared those for the museum as well. Though none of them were actually from Wiltshire, we know that they were all brought in from Eastern Europe because they were quite rare at the time, and they became extinct due to the loss of habitat, essentially farming rather than sheep grazing, and hunting. The birds were very vulnerable because they live on the ground and really don't like flying very much. And there's a female bird now on display in the Salisbury Museum, one of our Wessex Museum's partner, which is one of the last bustards to be found in Britain. It was served at a dinner for 10 people by E.T. Stevens, director of the museum, in 1871, and is said to be, it was said to have been extremely tender, the breast like plover and the thigh not unlike pheasant, which I think explains a bit why they went extinct. Bustards have been reintroduced to Britain. There's a program on the plane that's been running since 2004, bringing in birds initially from Russia and latterly eggs from Spain and Portugal. So in 2019, the first chicks were hatched here, and there's now over 100 bustards living in the wild in a self-sustaining population in Salisbury Plain. So a fantastic victory for reintroduction. Now, the great bustard is very dear to our hearts in Wiltshire. It's on the county flag, but also in all sorts of other things, like the Stonehenge Ale's Great Bustard, which is allegedly an extra strong bitter. Now, I've never actually tried this because they don't produce it anymore, but I have a bit of a regret there. Perhaps we ought to bring it back. My next work is a portrait of Margaret Peggy, as she was called, Guido. And she was president of the Wiltshire Archaeological and Natural History Society that runs the museum, jointly with the archaeologist, well-known archaeologist as well, Stuart Pigot, her former husband. Peggy was an amazing archaeologist. She was one of the first students at the female students at the Institute of Archaeology in London, excavated many prehistoric sites in Wiltshire and beyond. And she's best known as the go-to authority on glass beads, both from the Iron Age right the way through to the Anglo-Saxon period. Now, she was born in 1912 and worked initially at St Albans with Mortimer and Tessa Wheeler. And she met Stuart Pigot at the Institute where she studied. And in 1939, both of them were invited to excavate at Sutton Hoo. Of course, that is the very famous Anglo-Saxon royal ship burial. The film, more recently, that story was immortalized in The Dig, and you can see here Lily James being portrayed as portraying Peggy Pigot. Now, I'm afraid this is one of the times when we started shouting at the well, at the screen of the film rather than the TV, because they didn't capture Peggy. In the film, she was portrayed as being sort of new to archaeology. In fact, she was every bit as experienced as Stuart, and probably was a better excavator actually at the time. And of course, they'd also put her in glasses, which she didn't wear. So it really didn't do her justice for her skill and expertise as an archaeologist. Wonderful portrait, and that hangs on the stairs leading to the museum offices. So we pass it every day, and thank her for her contribution to archaeological research. And then following on from this, I love this. This is an oil on board painting of the excavations at Snail Down in Wiltshire. This was it was the excavation of a Bronze Age barrow cemetery, and you can see looking the hillside beyond is Sidbury Hill, not Silbury Hill, Sidbury Hill, which has an Iron Age hill fort on it. The site here is a cemetery of about 10 or 12 Bronze Age barrows, and this area had been extensively used by the army for training, and not least of which was we've got an amazing photo of a tank driving over one of the barrows and leaving a deep furrow in the top of the barrow. So after the end of the war, it was realized that the barrows really were in quite poor condition and were not being looked after very well by the army, by the MOD. And it was decided that to preserve the site from further damage from the army training, that the site should be excavated. And there's a program funded by the Department for the Environment, and many of the people, and it was actually undertaken by the museum. The then curator was able to take, Nick Thomas took leave of absence, paid a leave of absence from the museum to direct and lead the excavations. Many of those who worked on it were members of our society as well. The team camped out locally. They had some huts left over from a World War II prisoner of war camp. But the real benefit was that they had catering provided by students from Bath University, Bath College rather, who were catering students. So I'm told that they ate brilliantly. Sounds like a real excavation to take part in. So Molly was part of the excavation team, and she captured this scene. And it's one of those paintings that really shows the, if you like, the social history behind archaeology, because the published report is very dry, and it talks about all the finds and soil types and colors and all the boring stuff about archaeology. But this painting really brings to life how the excavation worked, and we can work out, we can sort of tot off who some of the people are in the painting, which is wonderful. And the painting was donated to the museum by Nick Thomas, the curator, and the director of the excavation. But it was painted, commissioned, if you like, to be the cover illustration on the report that we published. So again, very much a part of the history of our society. And the next work is a cartoon for a stained glass window by John Piper. So John Piper was born in Epsom, studied in Richmond and Kingston, and then at the Royal College of Art. And he was an official war artist from 1940 to 1942. And he had a long association with the museum. One of the fascinating things is that we have kept the visitor books all the way from when the museum opened so excuse me, in 1872 right through to today. And we've been through those and sort of tried to spot some of the names. And at age 18, who should be signing the visitor's book but a certain John Piper, along with his father. And even then, his signature is quite distinctive. And he visited the museum many times over the years. And we're just in negotiations to buy a drawing by him of the marketplace in Devizes, which he then used as the basis for a lithograph, which was published in the Cornhill magazine and as the front cover for his book of collected essays. And in that, it's what's called he wrote what he called a letter from Devizes, and he talked about the magnificent museum, extolling the virtues of our collection, but then talked about the building not quite living up to the collection, which is something that's still true today. So this is a cartoon for a stained glass window, which was commissioned for the museum for our new art gallery that was opened in 1980. And you can see elements from the Wiltshire landscape I'll talk about in a moment, and then also some objects from the collection. So you can see the White Horse. That's the White Horse at Cheryl. That's one of the 8 white horses in Wiltshire. You see various round barrows dotted about, real feature of the Wiltshire landscape. The straight line, the sort of the earthwork line you can see is the Roman road, which ran from Silchester to Bath. Top of on the skyline is Rybury Camp and the Iron Age Hill Fort. And then you can see on the left, you can see the marching stones of the West Kennet Avenue. And on the right, the 3 stones of the Devil's Den chambered tomb, which is just to the east of Marlborough. Sorry, just east of Avebury, halfway between there and Marlborough. And then in the foreground on the left is the Wiltshire Thistle. So those are the main elements. Now I thought it'd be quite fun to look at the window in a bit more detail in its place in the museum. This is the unveiling of the window by the Viscount Eccles in 1980. You see them there assembled in front of it. But we recently had the museum, the window restored for us, cleaned for us, and it really shines out in our art gallery. And it's a wonderful centerpiece to the art gallery. But it also links to a number of other pieces of work. And I think this one is the most evocative. This is a lithograph by Paul Nash. Interesting, this was published for schools, and so art to inspire children, published in quite a large edition in 1936. And this is his landscape of the megaliths. And you can see some of the same elements. You see the marching stones, the West Kennet Avenue. You can see the thistle and round barrows, and well, in this case, in the centre is Silbury Hill. But it's really interesting to see how he was inspired by Nash's work. But then, as an archaeologist, I want then also to look at some of the objects. So this is our Middle Bronze Age display, and you can see the pots in a case. The proper study of mankind, personkind, is of course pottery. And the pot on the right is what's called the Stonehenge urn. This is Middle Bronze Age cremation urn, and when it was excavated by William Cunnington in, I think, about 1803. And it was said to be, it was at the center of a barrow, and then it was covered by a triangular stone. And then inside it, it was full of human cremations. Now, in 1802, William Cunnington thought that there was no interest in cremated human remains, and so he presumably emptied it out, and so the cremated remains are still in the barrow. So we don't know anything about the people who were cremated, and then their loved ones decided to place the cremations in this urn. But the chances are that there would be something like 20 or 30 people whose cremated remains were in this urn. Interestingly, scientific advances with things like isotope analysis and potentially DNA would have been able to tell us much more about the people. But we do know from DNA evidence of Bronze Age burials, inhumations, that the burials in these barrows, they're linked, people linked in the same family. And so it's very clear that they are family burial vaults, just like in the Victorian period, for example. So it's likely that those 20 odd people were very much from the same family. And the barrow that this came from is right by the A303, right next to Stonehenge. It's one of the closest barrows to Stonehenge. And this is featured in his the cartoon, as is the pot on the top left. But this pot itself has a wonderful story, because here you have, in May 1802 it was excavated, there you go, because here you have a drawing labelled "The Antiquary and His Daughter Taking Home the Stonehenge Urn," pen and ink drawing by Joseph Wyndham. And you can see here this little girl, she's what, 6, 7, something like that, cradling the Stonehenge urn in her arms. The antiquary is William Cunnington, the excavator. Now, I find this really funny, because here you can see us, myself and Seb Foxley from the Wiltshire Council Conservation Service, preparing to install the Stonehenge pot in the display. Now, because of the cases, we realised it was only one of us could actually lift the urn into place, and guess who had to do it? It was Muggins, and it weighs a ton. There is absolutely no way that little girl could have cradled the urn and looked after it carefully on the way home. So I find that that pen and ink drawing just very amusing. Real triumph of art over real life. But then also in the cartoon is, go back to that for a moment, just to highlight it. So you see the Stonehenge urn in the centre. The one in the front is the one I mentioned. There's a collared urn, and then on the right, the yellow-looking thing with the is actually an amber necklace. So if I go through, I'll tell you just a little more about that. So here it is in our displays. It comes from a cremation burial down by the River Wylye at Upton Knobble. So that's about 8 miles from Stonehenge. And the woman is buried with all sorts of amazing jewellery, including gold beads, gold plaque, and various other things. But it's the amber necklace that I'd like to zone in on. So the necklace consists of 200 amber beads, each individually carved, and then held in place by, you see the plaque. This is we call a spacer plate. And you can see that there are holes that have been drilled through it. And those hold the strings of beads in a fan-like design. So this type of necklace is really very interesting. There's a few found in Britain, and there's 1 or 2 examples made of jet. So we know jet comes from Whitby, of course, and those are found in Scotland, but that means that necklaces like this were being made in Britain. But the key here is that amber isn't found in Britain. Any amber in Britain is washed up from shipwrecks or has been brought across from the North Sea, because amber is found in Denmark and Estonia, the Baltic coast. So that means that this period, which is about 1800 BC, that's roughly halfway through the lifetime of Stonehenge, then people had travelled something like between 1.5 and 2,000 miles along the North Sea coast, bringing this precious material here to here in Britain. And then it's not just the odd bit. There's a lot of amber gone into this, and the craftsmanship to create these spacer plates is really quite interesting. But amber plate and spacer plate necklaces like this are not only found in Britain. A few have been found in southern Germany, and also some in Mycenae in Greece, where one was found in a royal tomb a royal tomb. Now, in Greece, the burial there dates to around about 1400 BC, and it was that burial that was used to date Stonehenge before radiocarbon dating, before scientific dating, because the theory was, if there's a necklace like that in Mycenae that we know is dated to 1400 BC, then us plebs in Northwest Europe, we've got to be at least a couple of hundred years behind the times. Therefore, this necklace dates to around 1200, 1200 BC. Stonehenge must have been in use. This is very much the time of Stonehenge. Therefore, Stonehenge is dated at 1200 BC. The logic is impeccable. The slight problem is that the people behind the times were the Mycenaean Greeks, and it's them that were 200-300 years behind us in Northwest Europe. But it also opens up the reality that people were in touch between Britain, Denmark or Estonia, and the Mediterranean world. And there's sort of hints of evidence that there's a blue glass bead found in Denmark in a burial that came from the same workshop that churned out Tutankhamun's burial mask. So we know that it's likely that there would have been stories about the Mediterranean world circulating in Britain at this time. It's not as though people would have, anyone would have traveled all that way. It's possible, but fairly unlikely. But you can imagine that there would have been stories circulating, which would have been, which is really quite mind-boggling. And then my last work is slightly more unexpected. This captures a scene in the Shambles Market in Devizes. So Devizes is a really quite an unusual town because it was founded by the Normans, founded in about 1080 by the Bishop of Salisbury, who built a castle on a promontory looking out over the valley of the River Avon. That's the one that flows through Bath to Bristol and then into the Bristol Channel. So a really solid defensive position on the road between heading northwest from Salisbury that would have ended up in Bristol and to Gloucester, the sort of royal stronghold. So alongside the castle, he established 2 markets and 2 churches. And the name, and by setting this up as a brand new town, its name, Devizes, actually relates to the Latin ad divisas, at the boundaries, because the town was established at the boundary of 3 existing parishes that existed in the Saxon period. So it's quite unusual because there's very few towns in Britain that don't have much older roots. So 1080 is when it was founded. The castle ended up being stronghold held by the Queen, interestingly, so it's in the hands of the Queen, and it was a very impressive and important royal castle. Played a key role in the First Civil War between Stephen and Matilda. So there were 2 markets initially, and then the butcher's market, the Shambles, was first recorded in 1463, but the current building was built in the 1790s and is very much still busy with stalls, and the market in the marketplace outside is always busy with people coming from miles around. It's the busiest market in Wiltshire. Still a huge feature of Devizes, which is very much a traditional market town. This might not be the most obvious work to select, but it does. But for us, and it really captures that spirit of the market and how important that is to the town. The painting came to us as well through an interesting route, which is that we run an art competition every couple of years called the Oxman Art Competition. That was endowed by a gentleman called Richard Oxman. He was an American who had come across in the army during the Second World War, met Theophila, who he married, and then they returned to America. Had a very successful, and Richard had a very successful career there, and they had a big family. Theophila was a well-respected artist in her own right, and he endowed the prize in the competition in her memory. So this is the 2001 purchase prize, because the panel select winners for adult and children's versions of the competition, and then they select a work that will become part of the museum collection. And as I say, for us, it's really interesting because as the museum staff, we don't have any say in that. It's the panel that decide what to select, but it does bring in a slice of Wiltshire art, and in a very interesting way, a slice of Wiltshire life back into the museum, which has enduring interest into the future. So that's it from me. I just introduced just a few works in the collection, but just before I pass over to any questions, if anyone has them, just to say that our next exhibition, which opens on April the 9th, is called The Wiltshire Thatcher, a photographic journey through Victorian Wessex. And this is an exhibition that is based on a photo album, an album of photographs that we purchased, which is based on a holiday that the photographer, who we now know is Ernest Farmer, took with his auntie, at least, because he gave this album to his auntie in remembrance of the holiday that they spent at Whitsuntide in Sherborne. And they toured right the way through some bits of Somerset, North Dorset, and South Wiltshire. And there are photographs, amazing photographs of villages, sites like Old Wardle Castle and Stonehenge in there, which is a fantastic journey. But the thing that makes this absolutely amazing is that the album was spotted by one of our members who saw this photo of the Wiltshire Thatcher in the sale room details, and suddenly realized that it features as the image on the front cover of Led Zeppelin 4. That's the Led Zeppelin LP. To avoid the use of the word album, if you sort of mean, it gets very confusing. The Led Zeppelin LP that features, of course, Stairway to Heaven, and that sold something like, I think, 30 million copies worldwide. And the gatefold cover has, on the one side, it has a tab lock in Birmingham, and then on the front cover is a colour version of this image hanging from a part demolished, from the wall of a part demolished Victorian house, looking over at the tab lock. Robert Plant found this picture in an antique shop or junk shop in Pangbourne, and thought it really represented that rural past, and wanted to contrast that with the modernity of tower blocks. So 30 million copies of this album, and it's an iconic image for Led Zeppelin fans, what they call the Stickman. So this album, the photo album, is going on display on the 9th of April. And I hope lots of people come and see it. When we posted out about this discovery on social media, we ended up with over 3 million views worldwide, and were featured in publications like the New York Times, national newspaper in Japan, and what has to be our crowning achievement achievement, Kerrang, and the NME. Who would believe that a museum director like me would get quoted in Kerrang? It's just unbelievable. So that should be quite fun. And so that's it from me. Happy to try and answer any questions.